News. What's going on? It's Preacher. And with 6.2 background downloader on its way and actually happening, it's worth noting that we recently had quite a curious dev water cooler. Yes, we did. I've linked it down below so you can have a read if you've not seen it already, with various changes that are coming to the PvE world, which obviously affects us over here. So let's have a little discussion about it, because it's kind of odd. And it's... Some of the things I'm reading recently, I'm trying not to get down on Blizz, because people seem to think I'm hating on Blizz. But there are a lot of things that scratch my head where it seems like it changes for the sake of doing something. And who is this targeted at? And all this kind of discussion comes up. So the first was the personal loot improvements. I love personal loot. Why? Because people are dickheads. In an ideal world, which we don't live in, needed greed would be absolutely fine. But as you well know, no, it's not. It's not like that at all. And personal loot, rebalancing, potentially more loot for the personal player, all that kind of stuff, I think is great. Loads of people are using that pre-made group thingy. I don't. Personally, I don't use it. But there are still way more people than me who are using it. It's obviously full when I do check it every now and again. It is full of people who are raiding in it, and therefore pretty cool that personal loot is just going to be altered in a way that seems to benefit the individual, which I think it's all about in the pug environment. It's about the individual and not the overall team. That seems to be why they're in there. They're mostly in there to collect loot, and therefore it should have a better purpose. What I did find curious is that they're going to let you see. This was like a point. They're going to let you see what other people get. Why? You can't trade it, as far as I know. Was this a thing? Like, who got the stuff? Who was it? Did somebody get the stuff? You got the stuff. I fucking hate you. I hate you. Are people asking this? I don't know. But if they were, at least they'll get to see it now and direct their rage at the appropriate person, while complaining about their lack of own loot, I guess. Or maybe it's just to grats people. Maybe I'm being a cynic and it's actually to grats people on their rewards, which would be hopefully the case. So let's move on to the more interesting things. Oh my god. Secondary stats. They're going to shake it up. Reforging. How I miss you now. I do miss you, Reforging. I want you back. Can't we just say fuck it and have Reforging back? Can't we? So that it doesn't matter what we get, we can always kind of make it useful or make it decent anyway. That would be nice. I just pick the useless stat and make it into something good. That was alright. Nothing wrong with that. I like it. And now we have this. What is Blizzard's obsession with loot recently? Over this expansion, they are absolutely obsessed that you will be excited by loot. You will be. But I'm not. I'm not that excited about loot. I just want my item. This is my reward. I just want my reward for doing the hard bit. The loot shouldn't be the hard part. It shouldn't be. Come on, man. The loot should just be the reward. I got it. I won. I went through the boss. I learnt your mechanics. I defeated the boss. Just give me the reward, man. Stop fucking me over. Oh, so they're going to shake up the secondary stats. What are they going to do? Well, as you've probably noticed, a lot of the stats, the secondary stats, which are haste and crit and multi-strike and all that kind of good jazz, are in fact split pretty evenly. Not quite. Some have more than others. Down the middle-ish. So they say about 50-50. I would say it's about 40-60 in most cases. But regardless, that's the way the system is. They're going to shake it up. Shake it up. And they're going to give you a big wider variance. Why? And this goes back to the web show where it's just, but why? Because everybody's different. So why do this? Why do this? I'm not even entirely sure, and it's not clear. This is actually a rather vague blog post, in my opinion, and they haven't really settled it. Is it going to be kind of random again? I would like that question answered, honestly. Is it going to be random? It's like the belt sometimes going to be a lot of one stat and not of the other. Is that the way it's going to work? Are we going to have more randomness in loot? I hope not. I hope not. I've avoided raiding on the PTR specifically because I want to have a first clean look that I haven't had in several years of the bosses when we go into Hellfire Citadel. So I'm avoiding as much information as possible. So I haven't seen boss drops. But I hope it's not random. I hope it's not like, well, sometimes it'll have a lot of multi-strikes. Sometimes it'll have a lot of haste. Won't that be exciting? I'm trying not to be sarcastic, but it's not. A belt isn't exciting. It's not. Boots. I'm not going to get a boner over my boots. I'm not going to do that. Stop trying to force the issue on us. Stop trying to make it happen. Because it doesn't need to. So to help, let me read this part, because to help bolster that sense of excitement, we're going to shake things up when it comes to how secondary stats appear on raid loot in this patch. Inside Hellfire Citadel, you'll see a wider range of high and low secondary stat values and items that you have seen in a long time. Why? Why though? Most of us have 2 decent stats. That's what makes a really good item as far as I'm concerned, is if my stats are haste, mastery and multi-strike, I'm really happy when I see a mastery multi-strike item. That's cool. I'm excited about that. I don't want to particularly go all into one stat, and some classes really don't want to do that because both of their stats are really cool. They're really quite nice. I want both of them because they work differently, and it means in different scenarios they do different things. Some classes like Shadow Priest, for example, might want a shitload of crit, but that's the minority. Most people have a couple of good stats that they want to work on, not just one. I find 1 out of 2 less exciting than 2 out of 2, if I'm being honest. That seems normal, right? Am I in the wrong there? That's weird to think that, hey, I have 2 really good stats. I'm happy when I get both of them and not one useless one, rather than just having a useless one be really low. I don't know, man. It seems like a change that's just not needed. Was it a big complaint? I thought most of us had got used to the system by now, right? Well, some of us had bad itemization in Highmaul, and then Hellfire, Blackrock Foundry shook that up and made it a little bit better. Specifically for rogues, we had terrible loot in Highmaul, but much better in Blackrock Foundry. Is this a way to make it so, as this is the end tier, or the last raid tier, that you will get definitely really good items? If so, I can kind of get it, but I think I would still prefer just to see Reforging return and just re-implement it. That might have been better. But then we move on to the item level ramp, which then mixes things up again. Makes it more muddy again. I'm still of this old school opinion where I just want the reward, and that's me done. The challenge is in killing the boss, not in having this muddy, convoluted system of checking the item levels and all this. There's actually a spreadsheet posted, but we'll talk about it more soon. So what they're going to do is this item level ramp, which is, as you go through the dungeon, loot will increase. So it seems to be split into 3 tiers, and it's a 5 item level jump each. So, for example, your first 4 bosses will be item level 700, your next ones will be 705, and your last ones will be 710. That kind of example, guys. So, who's asking for this? That's my first question. Who's asking for this? Because this system only works in a world where every boss in a linear progression is more difficult than the previous one. That has never happened in the history of WoW. Ever. So who's asking for this? Who feels that way? I'm really confused as to who has come up with this idea and thinks it's a good one, because that has never happened ever. There has always been a boss that just felt and was simpler to your guild than something you killed earlier on. That has always been the case. If we look at Blackrock Foundry, we could say, well, sure, we struggled with things like, I don't know, Orgorgia, while we learnt the transitions, and Hands of Franz, we needed some coordination there. But Flamebender, we just had to kill dogs. It was far easier, right? And was later in the dungeon. So it doesn't make sense. Highmaul was notoriously out of order because various later bosses, such as the Twin Ogron, which was the boss before Kara, which was leading into the end of the dungeon, was far easier than, say, Tectus or Brackenspore on their mythic levels, and Butcher. Butcher was kind of the second boss, but I guess, you know, you can argue, I'm sure some people will, that you could do it in any order, and that's the point. But as far as I can see the layout of that dungeon, the one protecting the steps up to the next part was the Twin Ogron, and was generally the second boss to be killed. So, therefore, it doesn't make any sense to me. How is this to be determined? It's built on a faulty foundation. The foundation that every boss is more difficult than the previous. That has never, ever, ever been the case. Ever. So, therefore, I mean, we're going to see the arguments, aren't we? Why is, like, boss 4 easier than boss 1, but drops better loot? What's the deal there, Blizz? That's not the system. I mean, it's just an argument waiting to happen for no apparent reason. The other obvious problem, of course, is what's been brought up mostly, which is weapons and such. Weapons are a very big deal for a lot of classes. So what if your weapons drop earlier in the dungeon? They're going to be weaker than the weapons that drop for other classes later in the dungeon. That's just going to happen. That's going to be a thing. So why is that? Do I need the Warforged version of my weapon just to compete with the normal version of the later weapons with people? Are we going to have weapons drop off the first boss for everybody, and then later on in the dungeon another boss drops a load of weapons? How does that affect progression? Am I going to be very well geared because of my weapons earlier in the dungeon, then suddenly be completely dwarfed? because we killed boss 7, and now the two-handers or the rogues have much better weapons than what we had previously, and I can't get better weapons? What's the story there? Same with trinkets and all that kind of stuff. What's the deal there? They're very important pieces of gear that have a huge effect, more than boots or belt or whatever. What's going to happen there? Also, are we not rendering loot earlier in the dungeon useless earlier? What's the deal with that? Why are we doing that? Why are we making it so the bosses that are on farm seem to be dropping loot that people don't want? We've historically always had a problem with people passing on loot because better drops later in the dungeon. Doesn't this just exemplify that problem? Really, like, push that to the forefront because it's a lower item level, and for some bizarre reason, people really give a shit about item level? Why? Why are we adding all this muddiness? Why are we clouding the situation more than we already have with the Warforged and sockets? Why are we doing that? I don't get it. Who does this help? Who does benefits from this? I've tried to look at the pros and cons, but they seem very short-sighted in terms of the pros. Like, oh yeah, this is really cool. We'll get this item, and then we could go to normal and farm that to get better weapons for coming back into heroic. That's right. If you look at the graph, the spreadsheet I've listed below, what you'll see is that items that are later in the dungeon, but from a lower difficulty level, are better than the items that drop on the higher difficulty level earlier in the dungeon. Huh. Well, that seems really weird, because, I mean, you can argue with me if you wish on this, but I would say something like Iron Maidens, one of the last bosses inside Blackrock Foundry, on its heroic version, is considerably easier than something like Beastlord Darmak on Mythic. There's barely anything to do on Iron Maiden's heroic. You just kill it in the last phase. Don't die to turrets. That's about it. Other than that, it's really fucking easy. Beastlord Darmak is still easy, but it has way more going on than it does than something like a heroic fight, besides Blackhand, right? It just does. It's just simple. Blast Furnace, the same again. Blast Furnace heroic is just a cleave fest. It's just a cleave fest, that's all. And then you get into Darmak, where you're taping people off cleave to do certain things, and you're having to make sure your coordination in the final phase is good so you don't spoil all the room, and all this kind of extra stuff is going on. Not difficult, but still way more going on than those other bosses. But now they're going to drop better loot. I mean, this just leads to more arguments again, right? I'm trying to see the good side. I want to be on the fence. I want to say, yeah, I can see where you're going with this. I really can. And my only answer, I guess, with this is again for puggers more than anything, who are doing really well in a lower difficulty, but still getting better rewards for it. I don't care about item level, and no raider does. But the guys who do care about item level, who are more in the mid-range, who like to have shiny numbers there, I guess, maybe this makes them happier in some way. I don't think raiders give a shit. It's just more nonsense we have to deal with, where we have to check the sims and plug the numbers in to see what's actually better, which is a little bit bizarre. It just seems to add more convolution unnecessarily. It seems to be a change for the sake of making change, and I honestly don't. The only people who can be arguing for this linear rise in item level can not really have much experience in the game, honestly. You can't have, because you know that system just doesn't work. It has never been the case. It's never, ever been the case. So why think that this is a good idea or even makes logical sense? Doesn't to me. But again, it's one of those things that you're either going to love it or hate it. Long term, I can't see the system lasting past this raid tier. It seems to be something they're just tossing in there for some reason. It just seems like change for the sake of change. The personal loot system I'm fine with. The secondary stats and the item level ramp just seems like more mess to sort through, more clutter to deal with something that should be really easy in my opinion. Loot should be the least problematic thing, and it should only be a problem to the people distributing it. The people passing the loot out should be the ones who are having a little bit of difficulty with it because they're dealing with real people. It's so much worse when you're dealing with Warforged and trinkets and all that. In fact, to the point where I can say, at least in my guild, nobody gives a shit anymore. They get it, they get it. I'm not going to cry about it. I just don't care. I'm not excited about it. In fact, I've got to be honest. All the extra layers of fluff that are being put on top of items just makes it less exciting. It strikes me similar to the argument that went on with the ISPs in America, with internet fast lanes, which was the idea that ISPs like Comcast could give a preferential service, a new super effective internet fast lane to people like Netflix if they paid Comcast at the back end. There's no mystery internet line that nobody's using that's super fast. That doesn't exist. All they do is slow down everyone else. So it seems to me a system that's kind of being built around making the normal drop, the flat-out reward that you get, the guaranteed bit, bad. Like, getting the standard item is bad. What you're hoping for is this fictional layer of shit that's piled on top of it to make it better, which is completely random. All this extra stuff that's layered on top to make it better. So it's not really better because you're just making it so that the normal item that we work towards is worse. That's crapper. And that's the only feel I can get away from. I can't shake that feeling that just making the average item worse by adding all these extra layers of stuff is trying to force this excitement upon you. You should be excited about it. I already know there's a new expansion going to be announced at BlizzCon. We know that we're having an item level reset soon enough, just as we knew that our gear from Blackrock Foundry was going to be useless once we went into Hellfire Citadel. Similar with Blackrock Foundry from Highmall. Gear's just not exciting. It's a means to an end. That's all it is. For a raider, it's a means to an end, which means this isn't targeted at raiders, right? It can't be anymore. It's got to be tailored towards the guys who care about item level and who are constantly being asked, what's your item level? Now, if you do really well in a normal pug, you're probably going to be okay to get into a heroic because you have a higher item level than what actually drops earlier in the dungeon. That's going to be a thing. Very curious. But that's my thoughts on it anyway, guys. Thank you so much for listening, and I'll see you again. Bye-bye.